Okay, so if you'll join me, we'll open in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my entire will. All I have and call my own, you have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. We have two objectives today. By the end of class today, you should be able to identify the major factors contributing to the U.S. territorial expansion in the 1840s. So today we're going to talk about a growing country and where we get our dirt from. Basically, like what's the part of the earth that we're moving into, expanding out to, and who had it before we got it. And we'll also explain why the expansion of slavery became the most divisive political issue of the era. We've been kind of hinting around this one for a while. It's time to actually approach the plot with the central crisis of our country, what to do about slavery. Slavery is the thing that everybody had opinions on, and everybody had reasonably informed opinions on, and they were willing to argue about it pretty strongly. There's sometimes in history, sometimes just in life, when everybody agrees on the argument. We don't agree on the answer, but we're all ready to fight over the thing. I think in 2019, our thing that we're ready to fight over is the question of like sexual identity. I think that's the thing. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody's going to fight over it. I don't think that's a real good analogy to slavery, but I think it is a good analogy to like just the contentiousness of the issue, that everybody thinks they're right on it. Yeah. Maybe. I think, I don't know that abortion has the same political saliency today that sexual identity does. Maybe, but I don't think it's as explosive among people in general. Yeah.
You know, like there are some people who actually think that we're headed for another civil war.
There's always people that think we're headed for another civil war. I think civil wars are overrated. Let's begin in Roman numeral. Let us begin in Roman numeral number 1. In the 1840s, slavery became the focus of American politics in a way that was very, very pressing because our country was growing. We were an expanding nation. We're growing in influence. We're growing in economics. We're growing in not really military power yet, but soon. But we're just growing in size, population, and square feet. We're just growing in size. So to kind of put us in our context, Mexico, our neighbor to the south, won its independence in 1821. So it is no longer a Spanish colony as of 1821. And the Mexican independence is not a smooth thing. It doesn't happen very neatly. And it takes them a while to get a government established, to figure out what economics are, how the borders will operate. Some of the same issues that still dog Mexico today definitely dogged Mexico in its first couple of decades. All right. Welcome back. I'm sorry, guys. Sorry for that distraction. We're going to focus here. We're going to run out of time. So Mexico won its independence in 1821. The northern frontier of Mexico is California, New Mexico, and Texas. By 1840, California, which is part of Mexico, becomes an important trading partner for the United States. Now, California does not belong to the United States. We're talking about doing business with them. But to get goods from California, and we're talking about like a lot of natural stuff, the animal skins, other kinds of resources that New England can't get. They don't run it over the land. There's no trade routes that can cross this territory. There's mountains, there's deserts, there's plains, and there's angry Native Americans. So it's sailing, like the stuff comes from California, sails all the way down around South America and up the other side to go up to New England. But it's an important trading partner by 1840. Subpoint B. Let us talk about Texas for a moment. The first part of Mexico to be settled in any significant numbers by Americans was in Texas. And it begins about in 1820. So, it gets its independence from Spain in 1821, right about that time. Moses Austin, who is from Connecticut, makes a deal with the Mexican territory to go set up American settlements in the northern part of Mexico. So Moses Austin goes and arranges this first deal. So the Spanish government actually begins this deal. Spanish government sets up in 1820 to go develop Texas, to go turn it into farmland, to go bring in settlement there. Yes?
Is this where the elements it's the name of like the four things hold on.
I bet if you were to just look a couple more sentences, you'd start to see those words. Okay, that's fine. So I'm excited that you're excited. But so Mexico had banned slavery. When Mexico gets its independence, they banned slavery. So there is no slavery in the Mexican territory. But local authorities allowed people that were moving into Moses Austin settlement to bring their slaves with them. So it's worth noting that Mexico is a big country. It's not very well run. It's also not very densely populated, so there's just like pockets where there's nothingness. When Moses Austin goes and settles in the parts of Mexico, he's kind of by himself, and the Mexican authorities say, you know, slavery is illegal, but this is going to be hard to enforce here, and and they basically just allow it to exist illegally for a while. Now, by 1830, the Mexican government, who's a brand new government, they're 8.5, 9 years old as a country by 1830, and they began thinking that maybe they're losing their grip, their authority on Mexico because, you know, we've got laws, but the Americans are just not obeying the laws. In 1830, there's a movement to get rid of the Americans. This is like such a turnabout for today, but Mexico had decided there was too many American immigrants, and they wanted to build the wall and get the Americans out of Mexico. Okay? And so they're basically like, all these Americans are coming in here and breaking the law, and we need to get rid of them. So alarmed the grip was weakening, the Mexican government in 1830 annulled the land contracts. Look at Moses Austin and his settlement land contracts. Say, no, we're not doing this anymore. They also barred future immigration from the United States, so to keep Americans out. That's when Stephen Austin, who is some kind of kin of Moses, I don't know if it's brother or son or whatever, it's where Stephen Austin leads a rebellion. Well, it's not a photograph. I mean, they both have curiously tall foreheads, but it's not. Okay. So Stephen F. Austin led American settlers in demanding greater autonomy within Mexico. Basically, like, there's Americans in Mexico, but they are tired of listening to the Mexican government and said, we want greater autonomy. They're there. So then Mexico's like, oh, no, you didn't. You're not going to, have greater demands for autonomy. You're in our country, bucko. And so Mexico sends in General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna to go push out the American settlers, basically call in the army to go get rid of the American settlers there and to go impose central authority. Brothers? Okay. To go impose authority there. So Santa Anna in 1835 sends in his army, while rebels formed a provisional government that soon called for Texas independence. So you have like a rebellion in Texas to go rebel against the Mexican authorities to go make their own country, a brand new country called Texas, which was led by Stephen F. Austin, but more importantly led by a guy named Sam Houston. So Sam Houston puts up a rebellion force, but so Santa Anna here's your Jackson. Santa Anna storms the Alamo, which was a mission settlement. It's a church in San Antonio, mission outpost, and there killed 187 American and Tejano defenders. So Sam Houston then goes and leads a counterinsurgence against Santa Anna at city of San Jacinto, and there he pushes Santa Anna out of the Texas territory and won independence for this new country. Houston then was named the governor of a brand new country, the Republic of Texas. That was in 1835. Mexico is only 14 years old as a country at this point. I don't want to make it sound like the American rebels were taking advantage of a country that hadn't really got their feet under them yet. But it kind of smells like that. It kind of smells like there was an American rebellion that just stole territory from Mexico while they were organizing it and getting it. It smacks of the War of 1812 for me, when our country was new and vulnerable and gets into an international conflict. Yes, Christian. Yep. But that's kind of what happens here. Brand new country, vulnerable, and the Mexican rebellion basically breaks away apart in the northern part of the country. In 1837, about a year and a half after declaring independence, Texas asked for annexation. Basically said, like, hey, we started our own country, but what we really want to be is American, and asked for annexation to the United States. But the presidents, Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, neither one of them acted on it, because they know that Texas is going to apply for admission as slave territory. And so they're like, you know what, this is just a fight that we are not going to go pick right now. But, you know, Jackson's a slave owner. I don't remember if Martin Van Buren's a slave owner or not. But so they're both Democrats. They're probably pro-slavery, but neither one of them acts on it. And so Texas just becomes its independent country. In 1844, we've got an election. In 1844, we've got an election. The issue of Texas annexation became the issue in 1844. Let's see, 1844, the president in 1844 is, why can't I read this chart this fast? Tyler. So Tyler, who gets his job, that's like Tippecanoe and Tyler too, right? In 1844, he's not running for president, and it's an open election. And that year, Martin Van Buren, who is not president, hasn't been president for a while, but thinks that he should be president, runs for office. Martin Van Buren is like a founder of the Democratic Party. He invented the Democratic Party and built it up based on loyalty and like strong party identification. So Martin Van Buren tries to go run, but Martin Van Buren, make sure I'm on the right page here on the note. He's a Democrat, former president, and he's the presumptive presidential nominee. He and Henry Clay. Henry Clay is the Whig candidate. Henry Clay, they both agree, Martin Van Buren and Henry Clay both agree that Texas is not going to be admitted to the Union because there's too much of a danger over the question of slavery. However, Martin Van Buren does not get nominated by the Democratic Party. They don't pick MVB. Instead, the Democrats go and nominate James K. Polk, who looks strangely like a young Mel Gibson. So James K. Polk is a Tennessee slaveholder. He's a friend of Andrew Jackson's, and he gets the Democratic nomination instead of Martin Van Buren. He supported Texas annexation. James K. Polk says, oh yeah, Texas, let's bring them into the country. And he also wants to grow America in the north, in the Oregon Territory. So the Oregon Territory, basically there's a part of this which was owned by the United States. It's not a state, it's just unincorporated territory. And there's a part that's Canada, which is owned by the British. And James K. Polk, like his campaign slogan is, we want all of this territory up here, and we want it up to the 54-degree line of latitude, 54 and 40 minutes north. And the phrase was 54-40 or fight. Basically, we want to negotiate or buy this from England, and if they don't sell it, we'll fight them for it. So that's James K. Polk, and he gets the Democratic nomination instead of Martin Van Buren, and the election goes off, Polk versus Clay. Yes? Okay. So James K. Polk, Tennessee slaveholder, ends up, he's the dark horse. If you ever hear the term the dark horse, that's a person nobody sees coming. So it's a horse racing term, the horse that comes out of the shadows that nobody sees coming, the dark horse, and that's James K. Polk. Nobody saw this guy winning an election, but he defeated Henry Clay in a close election. And so when he wins, he paves the way for Texas to come into the Union. Now, He's not the president who allows Texas to come in as territory, but his election makes it possible that like the last political barrier is over, so we're bringing Texas in. Yes, Harry.
Oh wait, never mind. I got it.
Okay, good. Subpoint D. So James K. Polk is a president. We're in the era of photography now. Did you guys know that? Welcome to photography. Okay, so James K. Polk becomes president, and he lays out basically 4 goals. He says, in my job as president, I have 4 things I want to do. He's a Democrat, so he wants to reduce tariffs. He says tariffs are bad for trade. They hurt people like farmers. We want to reduce tariffs and make freer, fairer trade. The second thing he wants to do is to establish an independent treasury, which had been back and forth. We talked about this a couple of times. It's a political issue that's kind of lost on us today in the 21st century. But the idea was that government money, the treasury, shouldn't be political. You should have an independent treasury and kind of strip it from its political terms. So James K. Polk wants to do. He wants to reduce tariffs, he wants to establish an independent treasury, and he has 2 territory goals. He wants to settle the Oregon dispute, the Oregon country, and he wants to bring California into the Union. California still belongs to Mexico, but he would like it. Yes, Harry?
Does he have like a mullet?
Yes. Resolving Oregon was actually pretty easy. Great Britain was ready to negotiate. They didn't actually want to go fight. They negotiate a line which is somewhat south of 5440, but a territory that can be agreed upon. So, that's the thing with negotiations. You don't always get everything you want, but you make a big ask and argue it down from there. And so Americans, though, looked at the rest of this territory, and the majority of Americans supported a war for California, but a vocal minority said that the only reason that we want to go take new territory is so you can make slaveholding land out of it. And James K. Polk's a slave owner, so people think that this is obviously what we're going to do. Subpoint E. Encouraged to go forward, though, we decide to go get into a war with Mexico to go take land from them. And we fight the Mexican-American War on 3 fronts. The first is led by a guy named John C. Fremont up in north and east of San Francisco in kind of Sonoma and the Napa Valley kind of area. This is a new name for us, Fremont, John C. Fremont. Go ahead and remember him. He stays important for the rest of this unit. He becomes a pretty important person for us until Christmas, then he becomes irrelevant. But John C. Fremont leads a rebellion in California known as the Bear Flag Rebellion. The flag of California today is a white flag with a star on it, a bear on it, and it says California Republic. California, when it rebelled against Mexico, claimed independence as its own independent country, led by John C. Fremont, and his rebels carried a bear flag. And so it's the Bear Flag Rebellion of John C. Fremont. So he is fighting Mexican troops in the northern part of California. There's a second fight in the city of Santa Fe over in what is today New Mexico. In Santa Fe, there was a General Stephen Kearny goes and swoops into the city of Santa Fe with 1,600 troops and occupies the city of Santa Fe there. And then, in a diversionary tactic, which is brilliant but unnecessary, I think, General Winfield Scott, please remember this guy's name also, Winfield Scott sails out of New Orleans, pops through Palo Alto, and then ends up down in Veracruz. And Winfield Scott leads an invasionary force into Mexico through the port city of Veracruz for no reason other than to draw Mexican troops out of defending California and New Mexico and draw them down in to go fight Santa Anna, where they go and occupy Mexico City and swoop in American troops through Veracruz. And basically we just tie up the capital and force Mexico to go cede this land up to us. As soon as they do that, we pull out of Veracruz and leave it. And it's settled through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, whereupon the United States gained the territory that's California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. A huge swath of land. a three-front war of Mexican-American War. Basically, Fremont's Bear Flag Rebellion in California, Kearny's rebellion in Santa Fe, and then Winfield Scott invading through Veracruz. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was a forced compromise of Mexico. And now, again, the United States doesn't really look like the hero in this. Again, it looks like we swoop into a young and still getting their feet under them Mexico and bully land out of them. Basically like, give us your lunch money. And yeah, I don't have a way to clean that sentence up. It just looks like we bullied them out. Now, treaties are negotiated, and it was a negotiated treaty, so Mexico had to agree to it. Yeah, this is still resented in Mexican nationalist politics today. Yeah, Fancy.
How come they didn't just take more licenses?
Because maybe they just felt like that's as much as they could hold. We would later try to get more. Okay, so subpoint F. A region in northern Mexico that had been part of Spain and Mexico for centuries was suddenly split into two with new sovereign leadership and new senses of understanding of rights. Men got American rights. Indians did not. You find that like in these territories they're governed in the governing documents call the Indians the savage tribes. Mexico had abolished slavery, but they didn't abolish slavery. But in the new territories, these didn't necessarily come in as free places. Say like Texas. The Texas Constitution actually specifically included protections for slavery, but it also specifically denied civil rights to Indians or black people. Subpoint G, let's turn back to California. The non-Indian population of California in 1848 was about 15,000 people. There's about 15,000 people in the whole territory of California that aren't Native Americans. By 1860, so what is that, 12 years later, by 1860, that number went from 15,000 to 360,000. They went from a kind of a small number to 1/3 And why? Because in 1849, they find gold. Right, it's the gold rush. Setting up California's football team. The 49ers, right? But so the gold rush population, the people that moved into San Francisco to go cheer for the Niners were incredibly diverse. There's miners from Mexico, from South America, there's white miners, everybody swoops in. That's the nature of a gold rush. Everybody goes and gets theirs. There are white non-miners, people who are not there for mining, who are there for doing business and doing everything else, coming from America and from Europe. There's also thousands of Chinese laborers who are not slaves, but who have sold their labor in the style of an indentured servant. They've sold their labor to Chinese merchant companies, who then get their contracts sold to U.S. mine and railroad companies. And they're not technically slaves, but they basically have no rights over their own condition in life. So it kind of smells like slavery. And they become, the Chinese miners in California. White miners then expelled foreign miners from anything with prospecting areas. Basically, if somebody found gold, they pushed non-white people out of that area, while thousands of Indian children were just declared to be orphans. And if they were orphans, then they could be bought and sold as slaves. So the gold rush, while it does start off a pretty good football team, it also comes with it some crazy baggage in human rights. Roman numeral number 2. In 1846, a congressman from Pennsylvania, a guy named David Wilmot, who's looking at you with the scared eyes here. David Wilmot proposed a resolution. So he's a member of Congress, he's from Pennsylvania, and he proposed a resolution prohibiting slavery from all of the territory that was acquired from Mexico. So all of this is called the Mexican cessation. Basically, when Mexico secedes this stuff to the United States, David Wilmot, he says, I want a resolution about slavery. Now, should surprise nobody, if he's from Pennsylvania, he wants to not have slavery in all of this new territory. So he proposes the Wilmot Proviso. And it was supported by basically every member of Congress in the North and opposed by every member of Congress in the South, regardless of political position. Right? So this has nothing to do with partisan politics. But if a person is from the North, whether they are Whig or Democrat, then they support the Wilmot Proviso to stop slavery in this territory. In the South, Whig or Democrat all oppose the Wilmot Proviso and want to allow slavery there. So this is the Wilmot Proviso. It was, and it passed the House. And if I look at these states in the North, I can see that they're the bigger states with more people in them. The South has fewer number of people. However, there's an equal number of people in the North. Like if I'm counting number of states. So it passes the House, it fails in the Senate, which I think is what we can expect from a body that is counted both proportionally yet equally, right? From two different bodies in there. So in 1848, James K. Polk is up for re-election, except that he doesn't run for re-election. This is amazing. James K. Polk served one term of office, and he said, I had 4 goals. My 4 goals were to lower tariffs, independent treasury, settle Oregon, settle California. He had done them all. Check, 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 check. And he says, having accomplished all of my goals, I'm not going to run for re-election. This is I'm flabbergasted. How does this happen? Some sitting, electable, successful politician says, yeah, I'm good. I did everything. I'm going to go kick back and watch SportsCenter. You know, like they just had done all of their stuff. Yes?
So if he did everything, why is he like not really regarded as like a famous or good president?
I mean, I think you can argue that like some of the goals aren't noble goals, but was successful in setting out his agenda and achieving them. But yeah, in his way, successful. Yeah. And so in 1848, he declined to run for re-election. Also, he was declining health and having met his goals. Okay, so you've got an open election in 1844, and Martin Van Buren wants to be president again. What political party is Martin Van Buren? Okay. They don't nominate him. The Democratic Party they're kind of tired of MVB, right? Yeah. He's, I don't know. He's dead now. Yeah, I don't know how old he is. You can look him up. It's you get your computer. 1844. How old was Martin Van Buren? The Democrats nominate Lewis Cass instead. And MVB kind of hates this guy. I'm not sure what their backstory is, but like, he really doesn't want Cass to become president. So MVB does something bold and sets it up as a lose-lose for his own party. MVB says, I'm going to go start my own political party. And he splits from the Democrats. He co-founded the Democratic Party. A party built on loyalty. He splits from it and starts a new political party. It's in your notes. The Free Soil Party. Good. So he does it to basically, because MVB knows politics. He knows the gig. He knows that if you take voters of one political party and you split them into 2 different parties, even if you don't split them evenly, you just split one party into 2, but the other party doesn't split, Van Buren knows they're going to elect the Whig candidate. This is just obvious. They're just going to elect Zachary Taylor. And that's what happens in 1848. Yeah. Zachary Taylor, this is an era of great presidential nicknames. His nickname was Old Rough and Ready. When you look up pictures of Zachary Taylor, he looks like he's rumply. He looks like he's riding around in the back seat of your car on the floorboards for a couple, you know, like when you pull the t-shirt out and you're like, oh, I forgot I had this thing. It's wrinkly and looks like hell. That's Zachary Taylor. Old Rough and Ready becomes president in 1844. And he's the new president of America. So in 1848, Zachary Taylor assumes office. Now, what was going on in the world? Let us change our focus here for a minute. In 1848, in world history, 1848 was a tumultuous year that it looks like the wheels were coming off of the modern world. Okay, so let's walk through it. In 1848, Great Britain was, let's see, in 1848, It's either Queen Victoria or just about to be in England. You've got calls for democratic reforms where people are like, yeah, I think it's Queen Victoria. People are just like insisting for a greater voice of the people. So 1848 has got some political unrest in England. It further has political unrest in France. Okay, so French political history is such a poop show, right? I mean, you've got like the kings for all of those years, and then you have the French Revolution, and then the French Revolution goes bad, and then it goes like Napoleonically bad, and then they get rid of Napoleon and go reestablish the king, and they're like, nah, king kind of sucked, and they get rid of the king, and they like Napoleon III, they skip number 2, goes and reestablishes the French Republic. Quick, and so then they get rid of Napoleon III, and they put in the new French Republic, the Second French Republic, and even that doesn't go. 1848, France is establishing the Second French Republic. So you've got calls for democratic reforms in England. You've got France being its dumpster fire, and then, as usual, Germany. Germany's not a country yet. Germany is the old leftover of the Holy Roman Empire, but in 1848, Germany was unifying from its collection of small principalities in the old HRE to become a new country, and so Germany is unifying, and that's not happening smoothly. That's happening at the cost of civil war. And then Italy. Italy isn't a unified country, but in 1848, they're trying to unify Italy from all of the small kingdoms into one country, all of which was tried to be suppressed by counter-revolution. Christian, then TJ.
Okay, the Prussians, were they called the Prussian state at that point?
I don't know.
Okay, and would they have like revolutions to get out of the Holy Roman Empire?
More like civil wars to try to unify. Not really like revolutions as much as just like fights to go take over some other territory.
Okay, but you think that it's split up?
So the Holy Roman Empire had a Holy Roman Emperor, but it was never really run like that. They were all more like collections of principalities.
Okay.
So it unifies together to make Germany. Okay, what you got?
Does that little hat thing say Helvetii on it?
Where are we at here? Here?
Right there?
No idea.
Okay, it kind of looks like it, but that doesn't really make sense because Helvetii were around in like ancient Rome or Roman Republic.
Yeah. Let's see.
I don't know if they
Can we place
still-
this map where this is? This is kind of not a very good map.
Well, Helvetii were like this ancient Swiss.
The ancient Swiss. This, I mean, here. So this looks like Italy over here.
Yeah.
So maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. But all of it was put down by counter-revolution. Okay, so what's going on in the United States? We're watching the rest of the world be a mess. And Americans begin to sort of internalize some of this and say like, man, I don't know, democracy looks like it's not going real well. Everybody wants it, but what does it result in? It results in ruin and conflict. And Americans begin to get a little self-conscious that perhaps the American experiment has run its course. This is such, okay, Americans, we flip back, we're such bipolar on our confidence as a country. In one say, we're like, dude, we are the biggest, baddest, toughest A's on the whole block. And on the other hand, you feel like, yeah, we might also fall into civil war and the whole thing could, go belly up, right? Like, we're so bipolar on our own self-confidence as a country. For the most part, we think we're awesome. But every now and then there's like, ooh, what if somebody pops the balloon? Anyway, in 1848, Americans have feared that the balloon might pop. And worry that our own experiment in self-government would fail. Particularly the question over slavery might be the thing that brings us down. And so in 1850, politicians began searching for a way to hold America together on the brink of what feels like disaster. And they proposed the Compromise of 1850. It's not a very catchy name, but I think all the parts are there. Compromise 1850. The Compromise of 1850 said, we're going to admit California. It's been a territory, but we want to admit it, and we're going to take California as a free state. We're going to abolish abolish the slave trade in Washington, D.C. We're not going to abolish slavery. We're just going to make it so you can't buy or sell slaves in Washington, D.C. We'll try to make a compromise. That settles nobody, but compromises, you give a little bit here and there. They also agree to a stronger fugitive slave law. Fugitive slave law is if a slave becomes a fugitive, they escape slavery and flee to the north. They don't automatically become free just because they're in a free state. The fugitive slave clause, the fugitive slave law, said that that person can go be recaptured and taken back into bondage into the South. And they said this needs more legal teeth to it. We need to. The South was like demanding greater power of the fugitive slave law. And then they said any future Mexican secession states, all of these territories, when they want to come into states, we will let the people in those territories decide if they want to be slave or free. The term here is popular sovereignty. Sovereignty means you get to decide for yourself. The United States is a sovereign nation. We don't have to listen to, there's nobody higher than the United States. Popular sovereignty means that the populace, the people, get to determine what they're going to do. And they say that that principle should apply to slavery in new territories. And so popular sovereignty should be decided to us. However, we have argued this before. You remember that the Missouri Compromise said everything above the bottom line of Missouri, if it's above that line, it's going to be a free state, other than Missouri, which clearly doesn't follow anybody's rules. And everything below it is going to be a slave state. So popular sovereignty would challenge the compromise, the Missouri Compromise. Great, powerful leaders spoke for and against the compromise. Daniel Webster is like the central figure of the Compromise of 1850. I remember as a kid, there used to be a short story called The Devil and Daniel Webster. I remember reading it in grade school, that Daniel Webster was this like great arguer, that he could argue the devil back to hell. The devil was like, forget it, I just go to hell, I don't know how to deal with Daniel Webster. And so he's like the voice of the Compromise of 1850. On the other hand, you've got John C. Calhoun, who's going like full crazy face right here, right? John C. Calhoun was against this. He says this is a bad compromise because it doesn't protect enough slavery. But you also got William Seward. This might be a new name for you. This is a name worth remembering, William Seward. He'll become super important for the rest of this unit. He was Lincoln's Secretary of State. He's the guy that has to go deal with the Confederacy. He's also the guy that buys Alaska, like Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. He's the same guy here. He is also against the compromise for different reasons than Calhoun. President Taylor opposed the compromise. Old rough and ready, Zachary Taylor opposed the compromise, but then he went and died. And so when he died, Millard Fillmore becomes the president. Fill him up, Fillmore down here. And Fillmore supported the compromise. And once he becomes president, we get the Compromise of 1850. Yes, Harry?
Wait, so Seward in the movie Lincoln,
Uh-huh.
is he the guy who's
Uh-huh.
riding in the carriage with him at the beginning?
Probably. I actually just saw this movie last week, but I wasn't watching it real close. I was pressing T-shirts, so I don't know. I'm sorry. Yes?
So if Seward bought Alaska in
Mhm.
1850,
Mhm.
why did it not become a state until 1959?
I don't know. Why is Guam still not a state? Okay. Because you can't find Guam on a map. If I were to hand you the globe right now, it would take you a couple of minutes. You don't even know where to start looking. All right. Maybe Jimmy could find it. The rest of you have never even heard of Guam. All right. Huh? Nice. I think Mr. Lindgren, was he born in Guam? He lived in Guam. I think he was born, I think he's Guaman. Guamanian. He's a Guamaniac. Guamanite. Guamawegian. Okay. So Millard Fillmore becomes president, secures the compromise, and the Compromise of 1850 comes in. California is admitted as a free state. Slave trade's abolished in D.C. Get a stronger fugitive slave law, and any Mexican concession states would determine there. Okay, subpoint D. The Fugitive Slave Act allowed special federal commissioners to determine the fate of alleged fugitives. So basically what would happen would be that if a person was walking down the streets of Philadelphia and somebody says, hey, you look like my former slave. I bet you escaped and came up here and are hiding in the city of Philadelphia. Somebody's like, no, I'm from Philadelphia. He's like, no, you're totally my escaped slave. This is settled through a federal commission. They drag this person into court, and there the commission determines whether or not that person is an escaped slave. However, this doesn't look very fair because the person doesn't get a jury trial or even allowed to testify for themselves. They're like just being accused of being an escaped slave. It's like, no, I'm not. You don't get the chance to say that. You don't get a chance to go the testimony of the accused individual. So very strong fugitive slave law. In a series of dramatic confrontations, fugitives, aided by abolitionist allies, violently resisted capture. Because it kind of also looks like a person in the South could just come up to the North, accuse black people of being escaped slaves, and just go steal a human and capture them into slavery. It's kind of what this looks like to me. A lot of people just left altogether. They would rather move to Canada where they could at least get some protections against unfair treatment of the laws. Subpoint E. In 1852, Franklin Pierce wins election. Franklin Pierce looks... Yes, it's a good whopping. Franklin Pierce looks... I split this last hour. He's got greasy hair. He looks like he smells bad. But then somebody says, Winfield Scott also looks like he smells bad. So Stephen Douglas looks annoyed at the smell of both of them. You guys. Okay, so Franklin Pierce won election in 1852, and pretty decisively. And what it was basically Franklin Pierce is a Democrat, and you no longer have MVB trying to split off the party. He gives a united Democratic Party that Democrats have a clear issue on slavery. They're for it. And the Whigs now are the ones that don't, they're a divided party. The Whigs don't have an answer on slavery, to the slavery question. So even Democrats in the North who would not be slave holders, there's enough Democrats in the North with a cohesive voice that Whigs, who are fighting amongst themselves over the slavery, divide their votes. And so ends up being a Democratic victory, and Franklin Pierce wins office. When he does that, Stephen A. Douglas, this guy down here. So Stephen Douglas, if you are in forensics and you participate in Lincoln-Douglas debate, he's the Douglas of Lincoln-Douglas debate. So Stephen Douglas, he's an Illinois politician, and he basically introduces a bill that territorial government to allow territories in Kansas and Nebraska. So this stuff all through here, Stephen Douglas wants to build a transcontinental railroad. And he says all of this disorganized territory, if we organize this into two new territories, the Kansas territory and the Nebraska territory, and put a government in place, we're not talking about statehood yet, we're just talking about territories. You put a government in place and organize these two things out, then we can have enough of a government to run a transcontinental railroad, and let's put a train connection over to California. So Stephen Douglas proposes to do that. Stephen Douglas also says that slavery then should be a question of popular sovereignty. We will let the people there decide if the Kansas territory and the Nebraska territories are going to be free states or slave states, which is a violation of the Missouri Compromise, but Stephen Douglas proposes to do so there. Slavery will be decided by popular sovereignty. And all of this gets highlighted because we pick up a new territory down here called the Gadsden Purchase in what is today Arizona and New Mexico. The Gadsden Purchase, we don't fight Mexico for this. We offer them cash for it and say, we would like to buy this territory. It's negotiated with a guy named Gadsden. We want to buy this territory south of the river between this border and such. We would like to purchase from Mexico. Mexico was broke. They were running out of money. They kind of needed to sell some land. We offer a price on it. Mexico says, that's not really enough of a price. We want a higher price for this territory. And the United States says, you've been offered what you've been offered, and we think you should take it so we don't have to go to war with you and take it from you. And Mexico's like, oh, well, yes, we'll accept your purchase price. And we don't fight them for it, but we do kind of bully them for their lunch money. Yeah.
What's the advantage of getting that land?
It does two things. It's mineral rich, so there's good mining there. But more importantly, they there's a thought of running a transcontinental railroad through a southern route, that the Rocky Mountains kind of, I don't know, it's just an easier pass through here. And they're thinking that if we run a transcontinental railroad through a way southern route, there's a simpler way that'll go that way. But mining territory, but passage for travel. And they said, okay, we're growing in the West, and what's this? Slave or free? And so it like really highlights this furthermore. We're going to come back to this. Subpoint F. Under the Missouri Compromise, slavery had been prohibited in the Kansas-Nebraska area, but Douglas's bill threatened to expand slavery. Through Douglas's leadership, the Kansas-Nebraska bill became law, but when it did it, it shattered Democratic Party unity, and basically the Whig Party collapsed altogether because nobody had a coherent answer on what to do with slavery.